All right, everybody, welcome back. You ready to get a little philosophical today?
Always up for a good existential crisis.
Well, today's deep dive is certainly going to make us think about those big questions, the whole what's the meaning of it all kind of thing.
The big stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all thanks to this book we're diving into, The Art of Living a Meaningless Existence by Robert Pantano. I mean, talk about a title that really grabs your attention, right?
It certainly sets the stage. But honestly, it speaks to something many of us grapple with, trying to find our footing in a world that can often feel, well, kind of meaningless at times, right?
Exactly. And the excerpts you sent over really dive into this head first. Pantano does not hold back either. He's bringing in some serious philosophical heavy hitters.
We're talking Socrates, Buddha, Nietzsche. It's an all-star lineup of existential thought.
Right. So buckle up, everybody, because we're about to embark on quite a journey.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. So Pantano kicks things off with this really interesting idea that the unknown, like all that vast stuff we don't know, can actually be a source of wonder, not just fear or despair. He even quotes Thoreau talking about the tonic of wildness, which I love.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? We tend to focus on what we don't know as this source of anxiety, but there's a certain thrill that comes with acknowledging the mystery of it all, like a sense of awe.
Totally. It's like when you look up at a night sky full of stars, it can make you feel incredibly small, but also like you can't help but feel a sense of wonder at the immensity of it all, right?
Exactly. The universe doesn't owe us answers, and accepting that can be a powerful step in coming to terms with our place in it all.
Pantano even suggests that a little bit of pessimism, or maybe more like grounded realism, can actually be helpful in this regard. Not like doom and gloom pessimism, but more like a healthy dose of, okay, things aren't always going to go my way.
He argues that kind of realism helps us recalibrate those often unrealistic expectations we can develop, especially early in life. Those fairy tales with perfect endings and all that. Life rarely works that way.
It's more like be prepared for the curveballs, but don't let that stop you from stepping up to the plate.
Precisely. It's about finding that balance. And honestly, this theme, this acceptance of uncertainty, it's something we see reflected in the philosophies of many of the thinkers Pantano explores.
So let's talk about some of those thinkers. Pantano dives right into the deep end with Socrates and Plato. And really, you can't talk about Western philosophy without these two. They laid a lot of the groundwork for how we think about the world even today.
Right. And their ideas are just as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Take Socrates' famous quote, "The only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing." It's a powerful reminder that we should always be questioning, always be open to learning and unlearning, right?
Easier said than done, though, right? I mean, look at what happened to Socrates challenging the status quo, got him sentenced to death. Talk about commitment to your philosophy.
Right. It really highlights the dangers of intellectual complacency, doesn't it? But thankfully, Plato, who was Socrates' student, took up the mantle.
Yeah. And he gave us the allegory of the cave, which is such a powerful image. The one where people are chained up, mistaking shadows on the wall for reality.
It's a brilliant metaphor for how easily we can be trapped by our own limited perspectives, especially in today's world with social media and algorithms constantly shaping what we see and hear.
Whoa, it's like we're all living in our own personalized caves. So how do we break free? What did Plato suggest?
He believed that philosophers are the ones who have the potential to break free, to climb out of the cave and see the light of true knowledge, so to speak. But even then, Pantano raises this really intriguing question. Maybe there's always another cave waiting, another layer of illusion to break through.
So it's less about arriving at some final destination of truth with a capital T, and more about the journey of continually questioning and trying to understand.
Exactly. It's in that journey, in that continual exploration, where we find meaning, even or maybe especially if there are no easy answers. But, let's shift gears a bit here. We've been focused on Western philosophy, but Pantano also takes us east to explore some Eastern wisdom traditions.
All right, take us there. What's next on our philosophical tour?
We'll get ready for some Taoism, specifically the wisdom of Lao Tzu and his writings on the Tao.
The Tao, huh? Okay, so what exactly is the Tao?
That's the million-dollar question. And the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu's famous work, it doesn't exactly give us a straightforward answer.
So it's one of those if you have to ask, you'll never know kind of things.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But, Lao Tzu describes the Tao as this kind of fundamental force that underlies all of existence. It's like trying to grasp water in your hand. The moment you think you have it, it slicks through your fingers.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. Or maybe not, but it sounds like it's more about experiencing the Tao than, like, intellectually understanding it, right?
Exactly. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, as they say. It's about tapping into that flow, that natural order of things, rather than constantly trying to control or define it.
And this is where that concept of wu wei comes in, right? Effortless action, going with the flow instead of fighting against the current.
Exactly. Think about like an artist who gets totally lost in their work, or a musician who's completely in the zone while they're playing. That state of effortless creativity where the self kind of falls away, that's wu wei. It's not about being passive, but about aligning yourself with the natural rhythms of life, so to speak.
I like that. It's less about forcing things to go your way and more about finding that sweet spot where action feels effortless, almost instinctual. Like you said, riding the wave instead of constantly battling the current. Have you ever experienced that feeling, that wu wei, in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. I think those moments of flow where we're totally present and engaged in whatever we're doing, those are definitely glimpses of wu wei in action. And, Pantano suggests we can actually cultivate those states through practices like meditation or mindfulness.
It's like that saying, a river cuts through rock not by its power but its persistence. It's about aligning yourself with that natural force rather than trying to overpower it.
Right. It's about working with reality, not against it. And speaking of facing reality, Pantano definitely doesn't sugarcoat things when he introduces us to the Buddha's teachings.
Yeah, he jumps right into it with the first noble truth: life is suffering. Which, honestly, might make you want to tap out of this deep dive.
Uh-huh, I hear you. But remember, that's a starting point, not the final destination.
Right, it's not meant to be a total downer, but there's a certain honesty to it, right? Life does come with its fair share of challenges, disappointments, frustrations, you name it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the Buddha wasn't interested in just dwelling on the negative. He offered a path out of suffering, and that path is paved with, you guessed it, letting go.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Are we talking about, like, abandoning all our possessions and going to live in a cave, asking for a friend, of course?
Well, there's some interpretations of Buddhism that might encourage that kind of renunciation, but it's not necessarily about becoming a minimalist or living an austere life. It's more about examining our attachments to things, to ideas, to outcomes, and recognizing how those attachments contribute to our suffering.
So it's that clinging, that grasping that keeps us trapped in those cycles of wanting, dissatisfaction, and, yeah, ultimately suffering.
Exactly. And, the Buddha took this even further. He argued that we're even attached to our sense of self. Like we have this idea, this fixed, unchanging me, but that's actually an illusion. We're constantly changing, interconnected with everything around us.
Whoa, mind blown. That's a lot to process. So how do we even begin to unravel those attachments? How do we loosen that grip on our sense of self?
That's where the Buddha's Eightfold Path comes in. It's a set of guidelines for living, covering things like ethical conduct, meditation, mindfulness, all aimed at cultivating wisdom and ultimately liberation from suffering.
So it's a practice, a way of life.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination. And speaking of journeys, Pantano spends some time exploring Zen Buddhism. Those thought-provoking riddles called koans.
Koanens, yeah. Those things are like brain teasers designed to break your mind.
Right. They're meant to short-circuit our logical minds. Pantano tells that great story about this monk who's asking a Zen master about enlightenment, and the master's response is basically, go wash your bowl. It's such a classic Zen answer, direct, practical, and also kind of baffling.
It's like, wait, what does washing dishes have to do with enlightenment? But that's the point, right? It's not about intellectually solving the koan, but more about experiencing it.
Exactly. Koans are like invitations to silence the mind, to be fully present in the moment, to find the extraordinary in the ordinary.
To find enlightenment in a bowl full of soapy water. I like it. But it also makes me think about the whole concept of freedom. We've been talking a lot about letting go, surrendering control. So where does freedom fit into all of this?
Well, Pantano dives right into this. He argues that true freedom might actually mean letting go of the very idea of freedom itself.
Whoa, now that's a paradox. I mean, freedom is generally seen as a good thing, right? Something worth striving for.
Absolutely. But as we've been exploring, so much of our experience is shaped by things outside our control. Our biology, how we were raised, the society we live in.
It's like those optical illusions where your brain is convinced it's seeing something that isn't actually there.
Right. And, Pantano quotes Einstein on this, who said, a human being experiences himself as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. Like we feel like we're separate, independent entities, but that's an illusion.
So maybe true freedom isn't about escaping limitations, but rather about recognizing our interconnectedness with everything.
Exactly. We're part of this vast interconnected web of life, not separate from it. And embracing that, that might be the key to a deeper sense of freedom.
It's like we're all notes in the same song, each playing our part, even if we don't fully grasp the entire composition. Which, hey, that actually makes me think of Stoicism, a philosophy that's really having a moment lately, and for good reason, right?
Totally. Stoicism offers some really practical tools for dealing with the ups and downs of life. For cultivating resilience and a sense of inner peace, even when the world feels chaotic.
It's all about focusing on what you can control, like your thoughts, your reactions, and accepting what you can't, right?
Exactly. One of the Stoic greats, Seneca, put it this way: we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. Think about how much of our suffering comes from those what-if scenarios that our minds cook up.
Oh, I am so guilty of that. My brain loves to invent worst-case scenarios, even if they never actually happen. So how did the Stoics suggest we deal with that kind of mental spiraling?
Well, they emphasize the importance of training your mind to focus on the present moment, on what you can control right now.
Which brings us to another one of my favorite Seneca quotes. It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Man, that one always hits me hard.
Right. Time is precious, and yet we're masters of squandering it.
Yeah.
We get caught up in distractions, chasing after things that we think will make us happy but don't deliver.
Like scrolling through social media for hours on end. It's like Seneca saw the internet age coming.
He understood human nature, that tendency to seek out fleeting pleasures instead of savoring the present moment.
It's about remembering that time is a gift, not a guarantee. But what if, even when we try to find meaning, we still feel kind of lost in this vast, seemingly meaningless universe? Pantano gets into that too. He uses that analogy from Kurt Vonnegut about the yeast cells, right? Like, they're busy making champagne, but they have absolutely no clue what the purpose of their existence is.
It's a pretty humbling way to think about our place in the universe, isn't it?
Totally. But Pantano also points out that just because we don't have some kind of preordained purpose, that doesn't automatically mean our lives are meaningless.
Exactly. In a way, it's actually kind of freeing, because it means we get to decide what matters. We get to create our own meaning.
Which is both incredibly empowering, but also kind of terrifying when you really think about it. No pressure, right?
Right. But seriously, it takes courage to face that blank canvas and say, okay, I get to decide what I'm going to paint with this life. But speaking of facing the void, Pantano doesn't shy away from introducing some, shall we say, less than optimistic perspectives. Like, he brings up Schopenhauer, who basically believed that life is fundamentally about suffering.
Schopenhauer wasn't exactly known for being a ray of sunshine, but there's a certain brutal honesty to his philosophy that I kind of appreciate. Like, he called it like he saw it.
Yeah. He believed that our lives are driven by this blind, insatiable force that he called the will. And this will, it's always pushing us to strive, to desire, to achieve. But it can never be fully satisfied.
So we're stuck in this constant loop of wanting what we don't have, and then even when we get it, we just want something else. It's like that saying, the grass is always greener on the other side.
Exactly. And for Schopenhauer, that constant striving, that endless pursuit, it's what inevitably leads to suffering.
So what's the solution? How do we escape this Schopenhauerian cycle of doom?
Well, he offered two main paths. One was asceticism, basically denying the will through extreme self-discipline and detachment from worldly pleasures. And the other path was through art and philosophy, finding solace and beauty in those realms as a way to kind of transcend the everyday struggles of existence.
But either renounce all your desires or become a starving artist. Tough choices. But I get it. They both kind of speak to that human need to find some refuge from the inherent difficulties of being alive.
Exactly. It highlights that there are many different ways to approach these big questions. Speaking of which, we can't not talk about Nietzsche.
Right. He's the one who famously declared, God is dead. And, I mean, he wasn't being flippant about it either. It was a genuine philosophical crisis.
Yeah. Nietzsche was grappling with what happens when traditional sources of meaning, like religion, for example, start to lose their hold on society. What happens when those old structures crumble?
It's like, if God is dead, then what does that mean for us? Where do we find meaning and purpose in a world without God?
Well, Nietzsche believed that it's in those moments when the old ways of thinking no longer apply that we have the opportunity to create something truly new. And that's where his concept of the Übermensch comes in the Superman, if you will.
The Übermensch, yeah.
Yeah.
This idea of an individual who creates their own values, their own meaning in a world that doesn't necessarily offer it up on a silver platter. Pretty radical stuff.
Totally. It's about embracing the fullness of human potential, even, or maybe especially, when faced with a universe that might seem inherently meaningless.
So we're not looking for easy answers here.
Yeah.
No shortcuts to enlightenment. It's about confronting the hard stuff, the suffering, the uncertainty, and finding a way to make meaning out of that.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of Nietzsche's most fascinating and often misunderstood concepts, amor fati, the love of fate.
Amor fati. It's like embracing all of it, right? The good, the bad, the messy, the beautiful. Not wishing things were different, but saying yes to life exactly as it is.
Exactly. It's a radical acceptance of the totality of our experience. Remember that thought experiment Nietzsche proposed? Imagine having to relive your life with all its joys and sorrows over and over again for eternity.
Yeah, the eternal recurrence. It kind of makes your head spin just thinking about it.
Right, but the question is, would you change anything? Or would you embrace it all, every last bit of it, as an essential part of your journey?
It's a powerful question. And it really makes you think about how much of our suffering comes from that resistance to what is, from that desire to change the past or control the future.
Absolutely. So much of our pain comes from that struggle against reality. And maybe, just maybe, there's a deeper kind of freedom and peace to be found in letting go of that struggle and embracing the present moment.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From ancient Greece to Eastern wisdom traditions, we've really gone on a philosophical journey. But if we had to sum it all up, what would you say is the takeaway? How do we actually live in a meaningless existence?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think there's a single easy answer, but I do think that engaging with these big questions, even, or maybe especially when they're uncomfortable or challenging, that's how we start to find our own answers.
It's like the journey is the destination, right? There might not be a final answer, a definitive meaning of life waiting for us at the end of the road. But in the searching, in the questioning, in the wrestling with these ideas, that's where we find our own unique path.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe that's where we discover that meaning isn't something we find out there in the universe, but it's something we create within ourselves.
Beautifully said. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the art of living a meaningless existence. It's been quite a ride.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, keep those existential questions coming. Until next time, happy pondering.